to the Money Focus Podcast. I'm your host, Moses the Mentor. On this episode, I have a fantastic guest joining us, Kelli Jones, who's the founder of LawyerKelli.com. She's also a virtual lawyer specializing in serving entrepreneurs and small business owners with a focus on contracts and trademarks. Her mission is to make legal matters more accessible and less daunting for business owners, ensuring that you protect your intellectual property and navigating legal complexities with confidence. So let's delve into the world of entrepreneurship and law with Kelli. All right. Thank you so much, Kelli, for joining the show. The first thing I always ask my guests is walk us through their career journey and ultimately how they started their business. So the floor is yours.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. So I've been a lawyer now for just almost 10 years. It's crazy to say. And I first started out working for a nonprofit and then went to another nonprofit. So I was kind of in that area for a while. Then I went to working for a private firm. And that's where I pretty much went to court every day. We were doing a lot of things, but mainly representing medical providers, suing insurance companies for payment. So not that fun, not that exciting. It was just a lot of court and a lot of commuting between the different courts. And I was living in New York, so commuting between like the boroughs and Long Island where our office was. So a lot of stuff like that. Then COVID hit in 2020 and courts were closed. So we couldn't do that anymore. The business at the firm that I was at was kind of slowing down since we couldn't go to court. And first they cut our salaries. And then in June of 2020, I ended up getting let go. And when that happened, that's kind of when I, within like 2 weeks of that, decided to start my own business and do something completely different from what I was doing, because I didn't really like what I was doing. I didn't like going to court every day. So I started interviewing at other jobs, and then I was like, why go do something else that I'm also probably going to hate? Let me just start something of my own instead. So I did that summer of 2020, and I've been doing that on my own, working with entrepreneurs and working primarily through, meeting people online since then.
So this was your first taste of entrepreneurship?
Yes. Well, I was like part-time in like the fitness coaching realm. So I was like teaching at, a couple of studios here and there, and like kind of debating if I was, going to do something more with that or not. So I was a little bit in that, but then complete pivot from fitness to legal.
How did you land on educating entrepreneurs being your lane versus where you were working at, where you were, suing those medical providers and stuff like that? So how did you land on that?
So I had taken like a couple different intellectual property classes in law school, but then hadn't really done much with it, after law school. But I had so at the time when I was part-time doing all my fitness stuff, I was using Instagram to connect with other people in like the fitness realm. And a lot of those people, either they stayed and became, an online fitness coach or something like that, or they turned to, being like an influencer or social media coaching or social media management. And so I started kind of seeing their online businesses being built while I was still, working at the firm. So I kind of saw this and saw, they're like having issues with, clients or, brand protection and things like that. And then at the same time, that like summer of 2020, I kind of saw a couple of other lawyers that were, using like Instagram and Facebook and stuff to market and kind of doing this, helping business owners. And I was like, oh my God, I could do that too. Like I already see that there's a need for it because I was already in that like fitness world with all these other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, it's definitely a need, for sure. How do you educate your clients on the importance of legal protection for their business? Like what's your approach?
Yeah, so it really depends on what type of business they have and what they're planning to do with it. I always say like legal isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. And that's why I typically recommend for business owners to speak with a lawyer on a consultation to we can help you, assess what type of legal priorities you need and kind of build like a roadmap of what things you need. Because, if you are launching a product line, that is going to be, your legal steps of what you should do first and then later on is going to look different than if you're launching a like online copywriting business. And all those will also be different if you're launching like a podcast or a brick and mortar. So I really go based on what you're doing. And that's when we decide between between business entities and trademarks, copyright, contracts, what do you need and what order do you need these things in?
A lot of times you hear like copyright and trademark, I guess from a non-lawyer conversation, right? It seems like it's synonymous. Like, oh, I got a trademark, I got a copyright. Can you kind of high level or make it very simple to understand what the difference is from a copyright and a trademark?
Yes. So copyright is ultimately something that is like a creation. So you created like a book or a photograph, you took a photo, you posted a video or published the podcast episode. You hold the copyright to that because you are the one that created it. Whereas trademarks, you want to think like brand, so overall brand. So it's something that you use as part of your brand to basically as like an identifier for your goods and services. So it could be your business name, your logo, a tagline, a podcast name, a product line name, anything like that. So that's the more like the name of something.
Full transparency, when I filed like my trademark for Moses the Mentor Money Focus podcast, I did it on my own. It wasn't easy. It was a lot of steps. I'm sure as a legal professional, you would suggest to get some legal help, but kind of fill in that gap. Like, can someone reasonably do it on their own, or is there potentially some gaps that maybe I missed? Do you always recommend that a lawyer step in and help?
Yeah. So for some things, I do say like if you are going to put in the time and effort, then maybe you can DIY it, like forming your LLC, for example. But when it comes to trademarks, I typically always say to use a lawyer. And this is because the first thing that we do comes before filing the trademark. We do a full search to really assess the risk level of your mark. And this means using, algorithms, like we use systems and that look up algorithms to look up like everything, because basically the trademark office looks at two main things. How similar is your name to someone else's? So not just identical names can be an issue, but also anything that looks similar, sounds similar, even has a similar meaning. Like if someone tries to register, like let's say a course or something, and one person has something similar, but it ends with like academy, and the other person has something, but it ends with school, those still, academy versus school still have a similar meaning. So that could be an issue. And then the second thing is how similar in goods and services there are. So, things can exist if they're the same or similar, but they're for very different goods or services. Like one person is selling like jewelry and the other person has like a financial consulting firm. Like those things can exist because people aren't generally going to be confused. They're not going to like go purchase jewelry when they meant to like hire a financial consulting firm and like vice versa. But things that are more closer together, like maybe if it was jewelry and like hair accessories, that could potentially cause people to be confused. So this is something that a lot of times is the main issue for why a trademark gets refused, because it was too similar to another either pending or registered trademark. And, if this was like 10 years ago, it might be different. But with, 500,000 plus to like even 1 million or more per year new trademarks being filed, real estate is kind of dwindling. So the chances that you are going to get refused for that are much higher than they used to be. So, working with an attorney we can do that search to kind of see like the risk level, and then we might be able to like help you get around it some way as well.
So, if someone's trademark application is denied, should they just scrap it and just try a new name, or should they just operate without the protection? What are like typical options that people may have when they're denied?
Yeah, so it really depends on the reason, because there are tons of reasons why they deny. But if it's because yours is too similar to, someone else, I typically say there's a bunch of options when, this happens with my clients. first we see like, do we have any arguments to try to differentiate your brand from theirs? Because you do, once you get a refusal, you have 3 months to submit an argument to that. So it's not just like you're automatically denied. Like you have a chance to try to overcome it. And those two main things that you want to try to differentiate are the name and the goods and services. So, if you have some way to try to do that, maybe the words leave a bit, yours and the one-sided, like leave very different impressions, upon people. Like once I had one that like one person was like very business focused and the other one had the word lazy in it. And I was like, well, my clients, like, it's really not too similar because theirs has an entirely different impression when you add the word lazy to it versus like the other one being like very like business like. And I'm like, that's different impressions. So then we were able to get through. So sometimes you can do that. And then, so it goes back to the examiner with that argument. And then, they might accept it, they might not. If they do, then you move on. If they don't, then, there are some options too. You can just use it without the trademark if you can't get it through. But that is really like a case by case basis because sometimes, the examiner, it's up to them. It's subjective of like what they think is too similar. So you and I might not think it's too similar. So if it's like not, if it's maybe not that similar and you just think it's the examiner, then maybe you can keep using it and like, an attorney will look at it and be like, I don't think you're like at risk of infringing. So like, even though the trademark office thought it was similar. So I think it's safe to continue. Whereas sometimes it might be so close that like, you can use it, of course, do whatever you want, but you might be like at risk for infringement. So there's options there. And then also maybe reaching out to the brand if they are different enough and saying like, hey, can we coexist together peacefully? And sometimes they're like, absolutely not, stop using my name. And sometimes they're like, sure, let's do it.
And what I submitted my trademark during pandemic time, so I know it was longer than normal. But what's typical turnaround time for your trademark from start to the decision? What's the typical time frame?
Yeah, so overall, the average time right now is about 15 months. The first 9 months is really just waiting for it to get assigned to someone. So it's just sitting there. So
Yeah.
long waiting period because government, they're still very slow.
So, yeah, that was roughly around the time that I waited for mine. So that's even, pre-pandemic, it was around that time frame as well, or I know.
Pre-pandemic, that like, whereas now it's like 9 months of waiting period, it used to be around like 3, and then it just kept getting longer and longer.
Another thing I learned that was interesting that, I'm hoping your expertise, you can fill in the gap for the audience. Probably not going to use the right terms, but when you fill out a trademark application, it's like these codes that I guess you're trying to apply your trademark toward, like for a cup. If you
Hmm.
want to put your logo on a cup or shirt, do you want to use it for video, audio production? I thought it was interesting for someone that's not with a legal background that, your trademark is not like, hey, it's approved and you can use it across the board. You have to actually, apply for approval for these, pockets and descriptors of services and goods. Can you
Yes.
talk about that?
Yeah, so those are the classes that you're going to apply in. And that's because, yeah, when you get a trademark, you don't have blanket ownership over that name for anything, but you have the exclusive ownership in connection with whatever goods or services you get the registration in. And this is really, it all goes back to confusion because they don't want to give people like the monopoly to use, like Apple. You don't want to give them the monopoly to use that for absolutely anything in the world. Even though maybe now they like can because they're so big.
Probably.
But you want it to be kind of more in a narrow scope. That way it leaves room for other brands as well. Like we have Dove deodorant and Dove chocolate, like both exist because they're different.
Sure. Okay.
So that's where you're also like figuring out when you're applying what you kind of like want to use it in or what you might want to use it in the future. So in like that kind of area.
No, that makes sense, especially the Dove chocolate Dove deodorant. Yeah, that hit home. I'm like, okay, yeah, that is two completely different companies and uses. I never even really thought about the name, to be honest with you. It was like, oh, it's deodorant and chocolate.
Mhm.
So, um, what would you say? What are the risks of not trying to protect your business? Break that down for us for people who are just out here operating and they might go viral or have something successful overnight, but they didn't take the time to do the protection measures on the front end. What are some of the risks if you don't do that?
So, one of the most difficult things is so, technically, in trademark law, the first person to use it has more rights to it. But the way that the USPTO works is it's the first person to file will end up getting the trademark. So that is tough because if someone else gets there before you, and not just identical, but even something similar, then when you do go to trademark, you might not be able to. And then that might lead you to either have to rebrand or, if the other company could send you a cease and desist, something like that. Actually, like the Burger King, the chain that we see today, was not the original one. They just happened to be the first one to file. So they ended up stopping the actual original Burger King because they had the federal trademark. So they were able to, the other one, even though they used it first, so they technically had the most rights. What ends up happening is you end up getting those rights. You still have those rights, but it's narrowed to a small geographical area. So the original Burger King was knocked down to only be able to use it in a 20-mile radius. So for most businesses, especially nowadays that we operate like online and stuff, we don't want to be landlocked to a tiny little area like that. So that's where it becomes like really important to be the first one to file as well.
Definitely didn't know that. So appreciate you breaking that down.
Mhm.
And what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you run in when it comes to, protecting people's businesses?
I think probably a lot of times people thinking that like they're coming up with a really unique name. And, sometimes they are, but sometimes it still might be similar to someone else in some way. Cause, sometimes people think like, oh, I'll add an S at the end or I'll add the in front of it or something to separate myself. But when it comes to trademarks, that doesn't create separation because the confusion can still be there. So I think one thing is like thinking about the legal side of things much earlier than maybe you think you need to, because it can sometimes prevent you from having to pay thousands, tens of thousands, even more than that down the line, because of that, like in the beginning.
I remember when I first started Moses the Mentor, the first things that came to my mind was, let me secure the domain name. So I went, and mosesthementor.com was available. So I was like, okay, great. Then I went, and I got an Instagram handle and I got a YouTube page. Are those good best practices to at least get out the gate first? Or do you just flat out tell people, hey, drop everything, get an attorney, and really start the trademark process first?
So those are good things to do. Like it's not wrong to do those, but I typically recommend like in addition to any of that, like doing a Google search and then also doing a basic free search on the USPTO website. It's not the same like more in-depth one that we'll do, but it's a good starting point to find like major red flags because you'll type in something and you'll see results and then you can click into those and see what goods and services they're registered for, because again, if yours is completely different, then maybe it's okay to use, but if it's similar, then you might right away be like, oh, let's go back to the drawing board and think of another name. Because especially if you're gonna end up having to like spend a lot on a domain, like I just had someone come to me this week who came to me and she was like, I just spent thousands and thousands on this domain and now like I did a basic search and there's high risk marks in her way of getting that trademark. And she's like, I wish I did this like 1 week earlier. So it really depends. But that she could have seen even just from the basic free trademark search. So I always recommend like that as like a very first starting point. And then if you're going to be putting a lot of money into it, then go to a lawyer. If it's maybe $20 on a domain, maybe the free search is okay for a bit.
Have you run into situations where, someone was just so passionate about the name, where they're like, hey, can we explore maybe purchase? Can you purchase a trademark from someone? Like, what's the process if someone just really, this is the name I want it? What are some options that person can do?
Yeah, so you could, if you could like either sometimes you can work things out with the brand will like license it to you to use, within whatever parameters they set. Maybe you do just buy the business from them and their trademarks. Also a reason why if someone wants to buy your business and you have the trademark, the value goes up a lot. Um, but there might be ways. Definitely bigger businesses are more able to do that. Like I think Elon Musk bought Tesla, the name, from
Do
someone
remember
else.
reading that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's possible. And then sometimes I do have a couple of clients who are like, I really like this name and it's not exactly infringing on someone, but we're like, from a trademark standpoint, it's probably going to be hard to get. But they're like, I really like it. Like, let's just try. And there have been like one or two times where no matter what, we couldn't get through. But with one client, the other brand that was in our way ended up they stopped using it, so we were able to get through. And then another client, we ended up going into like essentially a consent agreement, like I mentioned previously, like agreeing to coexist together. And my client agreed not to like open up a store in their state and vice versa. So sometimes there's ways around it and sometimes there's might not be.
Once you mentioned Elon Musk, and I was like, yeah, I do remember a story with the Tesla situation, so makes sense. You also help your clients with contracts. So, can you talk to us about the importance of a contract, and what are some best practices that you try to instill with your clients?
Yeah. So contracts, I always say, like, it's really to communicate everything that everything that you have between you and the other party. It's really to protect you and even protect the other party as well. So it's not really just for like, a lot of people think like, oh, it's just for like my payment term and my refunds and like the scope of services. But really, there's so much more that goes into it. So it's always just the best practice to like have one. And I typically recommend that you either had a lawyer draft it or used a lawyer drafted template, just because it's usually not what's in your contract that ends up like messing you up, but it's what was missing from it. So a lot of like ones I've seen on Google, like they just don't have everything that you need. And then when something happens, which sometimes it does, especially the longer you're in business, then it's usually a problem that happens because of something missing from the contract.
Yeah, and a contract can be simple, or does it have to be this long and exhaustive document? Or a lot of times people might do something like at their home and say, I owe you. And is that still legally a contract as well, as long as it's clearly outlined what the agreement is and someone signing it? Or does it have to be fully baked out and long for it to be a legal document?
So it technically could be a contract as long as there were, the two agreements and some type of, it's called consideration. So you can't have one that's like, I'm giving you this for free and, like it can't be one-sided. Like there has to be something going back, like services on one side versus money on the other, transferring or, something like that, or service for service. So it can't just be like a gift essentially. But yeah, it can be short. The real problem with like shorter agreements is really like it might be fine. It's only if something goes wrong, then it's like, well, it wasn't in the contract, so now we have to fight about what we meant to agree on.
Sure.
And so then it's like he said, she said kind of a thing. So that's why contracts are unfortunately longer usually. I try to make them as like short as possible, and then I'm like, what can I cut out? But every word is so important sometimes.
Yeah, it's crazy because you probably would want it simple so you can understand it, but then if it's long and exhaustive to protect you, you probably won't take the time to read it if you're unless you're a lawyer. That's what you guys do. But so yeah, I can see the fine balance there. You got to find that perfect length for your
Yeah.
clients.
Like I
Yeah.
definitely feel like I try to be less wordy and less like legal jargony than some other contracts I've read that I'm like, you don't need to say what you're saying in like 10 sentences. Like you could have said that in two. So I try to do that at least. So it's not like 20 pages.
Gotcha. What are some of the trends that you see in like virtual legal services in the future? Like, do you think that potentially AI could have an impact in your business? Are you already using AI? Just kind of talk about the virtual legal field and market. Is that something that you see some growth in on your end and other people that do what you do?
Yeah, I definitely think it can be helpful. And I know a lot of people use it for different things, and I'm definitely like trying to get into it. It's tough because you don't know with like everything AI, like you don't know what's true or not, like what's
Yeah.
exactly accurate. So I think that's the tough part where I feel like it could definitely help. I feel like it could definitely help, especially with like lawyers with like contract drafting and stuff, because it could like help with clauses that, you know, are in my library that it's seen a million times and when I'm like drafting something. So I feel like it's definitely needed and it can definitely help in the future. And I do know some lawyers that are trying to like build things of like feeding it all of this information, like even all trademark law and stuff to try to help with that. But I think it's such early stages. So we don't really know the outcome yet and also the legal implications of what certain things mean. Like I think I've heard two stories now of lawyers using AI to assist with briefs for court. And then it ended up being found out after they turned it in that some of the case law that the AI cited was completely made up. So
Yeah,
that's, yeah.
no, that's horrible. That's
Yeah.
horrible to think. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, hopefully, sounds like maybe more from a productivity standpoint, maybe it can help with some of those, easy in and out type tasks, but that are more tedious. But let's stick to the official legal stuff. Let's keep your human brain in touch with that, that got your law degree because AI just might not be mature enough to give legal advice.
Yeah, I
So
think it can get there, but maybe just not yet.
not yet, not yet. So, what resources or like tools do you recommend to the average person as far as staying up to date with legal information or how they can protect their business?
Yeah, so I typically recommend like following a couple lawyers that like will talk about this kind of stuff. So, you know, I try to stay up to date on like if, you know, new laws are coming out that you have to comply with or something. Like there is one that just dropped in 2024 for people with an LLC that have to file their Corporate Transparency Act documents this year if you already had the LLC prior to 2024. So I typically also like email my list like usually 2 times a month with like legal tips information. There's other ways too. LLC University is a website, llcuniversity.com. It's a free site that I like it because you can click the drop down for your state and it gives you like step-by-step instructions and links to all the sites you need if you want to like look up anything about your LLC or if you're moving states and you're like, I don't know what to do. I need to like
Oh,
figure
wow.
out this other state now. So that's like a really good free resource.
I've never heard of LLC University. I'll definitely check it out. And right now, you're primarily helping small businesses, or are you helping larger businesses? Like, what's your client makeup right now?
Yeah, they're pretty much all small business owners, either very small with a couple of employees or just, you know, on their own solopreneurs essentially.
And just to close this out, what final advice and final thoughts do you have about protecting your business and how important it is? And then also just let the audience know how they can reach you for sure. And
Sure.
the floor is yours.
So, yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at lawyer Kelly, Kelly with an I underscore, or my website is lawyerkelly.com, Kelly with an I. And I have my blog there. You could sign up for my email list there, or you can just reach out to me through there as well if you have a question. Typically, my main piece of advice that I give people is speak with a lawyer sooner than later, even just a consultation. I offer like it's called like pick my legal brain consultations. I say, like, do this as early as you can in your business. That way we can figure out what legal stuff you need. And, it doesn't have to be super overwhelming. I'm not going to tell you, oh, you need every single thing all right now and spending thousands of dollars. Like, no, we're going to come up with a plan that makes sense for you. That way you at least have the information ahead of time. Because even that can sometimes save you tons of money in the future because you knew, like, okay, I know when I do this, then I need to get, come back for a trademark or something like that.
People always are looking at potentially the cost, but right. But if you don't do it right, the cost on the back end will far exceed what it could have been on the front end. So,
Yes, absolutely.
definitely take the time. If you want to be a business person, you're gonna have to have business expenses. It just is
Yes.
what it is. So you can't just be the creative and say I have a business. This is a part of doing business. So take the
Yes.
time, get the legal help you need, get all the professional services that you need that
Mhm.
ensure that your business is operating effectively today and prepare for tomorrow. So I really, really appreciate you, Kelly, for coming on, shedding light on a lot of great resources for us, talking about your business and background. And I hope the audience make sure to check you out.
Yeah,
Thank you so
thanks so much
much.
for having me.
Thank you, Kelly, for taking the time to share your valuable insights and expertise with us on this episode. Your dedication to empowering entrepreneurs through legal guidance is truly commendable. And to my listeners, remember, visit lawyerkelly.com to learn more about protecting your business legally and also sign up for Kelly's informative newsletters. And don't forget to hit up my website, mosesthementor.com, and also subscribe to Moses the Mentor on YouTube. So until next time, stay legally savvy and keep pursuing your entrepreneurial dreams. Peace.